we have this bit from Secretary Rubio, who kind of made a remark, and then Rapid Response 47 went and put it out, and I don't know why they're so bad at the messaging here, but we're going to listen to the Secretary of State here.
This operation with a very clear goal in mind. I haven't got a chance to see a lot of reporting. I don't understand what the confusion is. Let me explain it to you, and I'll do it once again as clearly as possible. Perhaps you'll report it that way. The United States is conducting an operation to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and the threat posed by their Navy, particularly to naval assets. That is what it is focused on doing right now, and it's doing quite successfully. I'll leave it to the Pentagon and the Department of War to discuss the tactics behind that and the progress that's being made. That is the clear objective of this mission. The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Now that one little bit, right? The fact that he mentioned Israel, and that has basically set, the entire, right and America first, right, and the left set him off and said, well, okay, obviously Iran is dragging us into this. Now, I don't think that this is something that Iran has dragged us into. I think that he was fairly clear.
Sorry, Iran or Israel?
I'm sorry, Israel. My bad. I apologize. I misspoke. I don't think that Israel is actually dragged the U.S. into it. I think that he made it pretty clear that no matter what happened, there was going to be strikes against the U.S., against their neighbors. Iran is that kind of state, right? Like they are the destabilizing power in the Middle East. The Sunnis in Iran don't like the Shia, or the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia don't like the Shia in Iran, and they have not been friendly. They look at each other as destabilizing, and so it doesn't matter that it was Israel doing the attack. Iran was going to attack their neighbors and the U.S., but it didn't help that he mentioned Israel, because now you've got people saying, oh, it's all for Israel. And you can't deny the fact that the U.S. being involved does help Israel. This is something that is going to benefit Israel in the long run. And the American people don't see how it benefits the United States, even though you see all over X right now, there are people making arguments, myself included, that this is more about China for the U.S. than it is for Iran. But people that are on X and don't kind of, look at the big picture, they really don't believe that. They think this is all about doing Israel's bidding,
And that's an important point, that obviously you can't have this discussion without bringing in Israel. And if you look at, really like the past 6 months especially, Israel has become a major talking point, right? Especially among, you mentioned the horseshoe, right? You have people on the kind of the more far right and also on the left. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? There's a lot of concern about AIPAC. There's a lot of concern about some things that tie into Israel. However, I don't think that we can look at this without looking at what is the role of the CCP, because even a lot of the agitation around Israel, even if it's grounded in absolute truth, right? It's still something you had to look at and say, okay, how is this helping China? Because what I've seen with this is I've seen that, because in my own podcast, like I've covered China extensively, right? Like it's part of my adult life has been trying to expose the atrocities specifically of the Chinese Communist Party, right? And so I'm seeing a lot of people on the right that are actually becoming pro-China amidst this, which is really interesting, but it's really concerning to me, because I'm seeing people saying, oh, there's no such thing as a Uyghur genocide. It's like, like one of the first interviews I did in my own podcast, I interviewed a surgeon that fled China because he was forced to do live organ harvesting on Falun Gong, right? He literally explained the process of how that happened to him when he started cutting this person open after a kind of a purposely botched execution, and the guy's heart was still beating as he was removing organs, right? This is what the CCP is doing.
Horrible.
And I mean, it is, but but even he told me that was back then. He goes, I asked him about the Uyghur concentration camps. He goes, oh, absolutely. He goes, you realize that the CCP sells a lot of their organs to wealthy Middle Easterners. You know what those Middle Easterners want? They want halal organs. So having this massive database of Muslim organs in China is huge. And so I'm seeing though that there's propaganda and there are information campaigns happening on so many angles, but I'm seeing that I absolutely think that the CCP has amplified a lot of the Israel stuff to a point. Again, there's a lot of strong voices on the conservative side that are saying, gosh, wow, look at China. Look how clean China is. Look at their big, beautiful cities. Look at their infrastructure versus our infrastructure here. Well, China's not in all these wars. China's not doing this, but you have to realize that,
it's odd to see people on the right that kind of have taken on anti-Western sentiment. And a lot of that, I think, is because of the fact that the U.S. has had such botched adventurism in the past. They have decided to engage in wars that were poorly thought out, or at the very least engage in rebuilding of countries after wars that has not panned out the way that the people in power thought that it was going to. And so it makes perfect sense that people are like, well, maybe, it's like the meme, maybe we're the baddies. And while I don't agree with that, I don't think so at all. I think that there have been significant mistakes made, but that doesn't mean that the United States is a net negative for the world. I understand why people would kind of get that inclination, What do you think that the influence of China on people here in the U.S. is shaping the opinion that they have of Israel, or do you think that that's something that is just organic?
I think China, from what I understand, China and Israel's relationship isn't like super frosty. They kind of stay out of each other's way. They don't really have any overlapping interests for the most part beyond China generally wants the Iranian regime obviously to be stable, and Israel obviously doesn't. But I don't see them like really going to blows. I don't think the CCP would like expend too many resources to try and like foment serious anti-Israel sentiment. That seems to be more coming from Qatar, Iran itself. That's pretty much it. I would say that's like really trying to foment this in the United States. I do think Rubio is actually saying this. This is a calculated statement. I don't think this is like people are, a Freudian slip. He admitted that Israel pushed America into the situation.
Yeah.
I think he's saying this for a reason. Some people have speculated one thing or another. I think it's kind of a warning shot actually to Israel to say like, hey, we can back out whenever we want and you should be left. Again, people made this point. Lomez actually made a great point where he's saying ultimately we should be looking now to start handing off responsibilities to, again, the countries that this directly affects. So mostly to Israel, but also to these Gulf states that, again, this is in their interest, not so much ours. I do think it's true. I wish a lot of people, because this whole Israel conversation has gotten so toxic, like it really has, where you can't even like say it without one side accusing you of being a Zionist and then the other side accusing you of being like, Hitler reincarnated or whatever. I think let's just cut through it. Cernovich just said it. Like he's like, let's just cut through it. Obviously, the pro-Israel lobby, this is their thing. They're the lobby. This is the primary driver behind this. Like Trump in a vacuum would still probably be anti-Iran. Like let's not pretend that like it's only because of it, like the pro-Israel lobby that Trump doesn't want Iran to have a nuke. Like in a vacuum, Trump would still not want Iran to have a nuke because Iran having a nuke is terrible for us. Yeah. But if this is true, I mean, if this is the situation, the pro-Israel lobby now is to give us, let's get the SAVE Act, like start throwing us some bones, right? Like we took out the trash. I hate to say it, but you kind of saw it last summer. The big, beautiful bill passes a week after we strike Iran the first time. So it's like, throw us a few bones. Start whipping these senators into shape because it's like, let's make it happen.
Yeah. So, Elaad, do you have any thoughts on what kind of influence China has on the situation with Israel. And obviously, like I said, this is something that's very good for Israel, of course. If the mullahs are taken out of Iran, if there's no more, if it were to be a situation where, say, hypothetically, the Shah were back in power, or they had elections, that's clearly very good for Israel. And there's going to be people that no matter what happens, they're going to say, yep, that was for Israel. But do you think that the broader picture is something worth trying to focus on, or do you think that the people that are kind of anti-Israel are just going to say that and we can't make any kind of advances in the, I guess, the propaganda side?
So for many reasons, many people's top issue is Israel, and they will be blinded by that, and that's how they will go one way or another, just depending strictly on what Israel is doing. As far as China goes, I thought you made a really good point earlier about the petrodollar, because as I understand, one of the major underminings of the petrodollar, it's not too major, but like they could potentially grow into something bigger, is how oil is sold from Iran to China in yuan.
Yuan, yeah.
Something like 90% of it, too.
Instead of the dollar. I'm reading that Iran supplies roughly 10 to 13% of China's total crude oil. So this would be a big deal, because China imports already something like 80% of its oil. Any bites out of that is a huge deal to them. We're obviously just finishing up the job in Venezuela. They got a small amount of oil sending over to China. So this is only going to add to that. So I think the China angle is big here, but I don't know how much realistically China was ever going to do. Once they saw that Iran is weak, nobody wants a weak ally, and they're essentially to be disposed of. So once they ran out of their usefulness, China just said, okay, F this, we're not going to waste any of our time on resources on this. 10% of our oil isn't great to lose, but I'm sure they'll be willing to import it elsewhere. I thought one of the fascinating things about this, too, is that people forget how close China and Iran were at one point. A lot of the materials and chemicals, particularly for the ballistic missiles, were sent to Iran from China. And that's one of their major arms that's threatening us at this point.
I wrote a piece on my Patreon, and I think that actually China is the larger piece for the U.S. Obviously, Israel was going to do what they're going to do, and I think that everything that Secretary Rubio said stands true. Like if the Israelis attack Iran, Iran's going to look at it as if it was attacked from the United States. They're going to attack us. But if you want to go ahead and read about it, it's on my Patreon. It's patreon.com/philthremains. But I do think that China is broadly the big thing. And this plays into the idea, this actually does play into the idea of changing the focus from Europe to the Western Hemisphere, because China was involved in Venezuela. China's involved in Cuba, and there's arguments that Cuba's going to fall of their own volition. There's also people talking about the State Department being in contact with people in Cuba. Raul Castro's grandson, I think, is the guy that's in charge. Now, I could be getting that wrong, but the point being, the U.S. is already, positioning itself to have some kind of influence on a post-communist Cuba, and that's, again, something that hurts China. There was the situation with the Panama Canal where China was trying to build, I believe, ports on either side or what have you, and the U.S. is trying to, the U.S. has successfully stopped that from happening. All of this stuff is trying to take power away from China, so that way the United States doesn't have to get into a hot war with China. So you were going to say something?
If we zoom out a little bit and think of this more in the big picture, and especially in the second Trump administration, I think what we should understand here is this is a reinvigoration of U.S. hegemony around the world. Initially, people only suspected that, no, this is just Don Roe doctrine. This is just in the Western Hemisphere. No, he's only going to do stuff in Venezuela. He wouldn't dare to expand this around the world. They were talking about spheres of influence. I was hearing this so much in the liberal media. No, he's going to abandon different parts of the world. He's giving Ukraine to Putin and Europe to Putin, and he's giving all of Asia to Xi Jinping. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The president is strengthening his allies and then taking away the allies of our enemies. Yeah. So we are destroying China's allies. As far as what Russia's doing, they've proven to be ineffective in taking over Ukraine, mostly thanks to our support in arms. No thanks to those bum Europeans who I don't think we give enough shit to. And now what we're seeing going on in Israel, of course, in the Caribbean and South America with Venezuela, as you also mentioned, the Panama Panama Canal. So I think what we should be understanding from this is that the Americans, and President Trump in particular, is just knocking off China's allies one by one. And soon enough, it won't make any sense for China to want to make a move because they lack the allies to do so. So next on the list, I think we're likely to see China. Russia's bogged down in Ukraine. China almost has no other allies to help them make or would support them in making a major move on Taiwan. And they should feel pretty isolated right now. Like, who are China's close allies that are nice and strong? Russia's proven, I think, to be very weak. Again, Cuba's weak, Venezuela's weak. Iran's the weakest it's ever looked, ever. And they had their Ayatollah killed, and the repercussions to that was next to nothing. Too. We were warned about World War III as a result of this shit. Yeah. Nothing happened. So China running out of allies, being put in a shit position. U.S. hegemony is here to stay. And I'm so tired of hearing this third world just talking about BRICS and spheres of influence, and you guys are all morons with no real understanding of how the world works. And I'm glad the president's here to upend your worldview of how things should and can go.
Dude, Burkina Faso just signed a trade deal with Guyana to import tomato concentrate. You're saying BRICS is dead?
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.